I stood at the edge of the dance floor, my fingers tightening around a champagne glass like it was the only thing holding me together. The crystal lights from the Ritz-Carlton ballroom ceiling glinted off the emerald satin dress I wore, making me look every bit the perfect wife to anyone watching. But inside, I was breaking. Right in front of me, my husband, Richard Donovan, was spinning a blonde woman in a tango so seductive it sent a chill down my spine. The woman was Claire Monroe, the youngest associate at Richard's law firm Donovan and Healy. Just last week he said she was just a promising employee. Now that promise had her chest pressed against him, her lips grazing his cheek with every turn. I used to love his dancing, the confident steps, the firm grip. It all used to make me feel chosen. 12 years ago, I was a senior architecture student when those eyes melted me, and now those same eyes lost in someone else were the only thing keeping me grounded. They make a beautiful couple, a voice sliced in beside me. Evelyn, wife of Richard's longtime partner. A woman who always knew the exact moment to strike. I turned and offered a thin smile. Claire seems very committed to advancing her professional relationships. Evelyn raised an eyebrow, waiting for me to explode. But I didn't give her that satisfaction. I simply raised my glass, clinked it lightly against her martini, then turned away. As if I hadn't just watched my husband slide his hand down another woman's back. I slipped quietly out of the ballroom and into the marble-tiled powder room. Looking at myself in the mirror, I saw a woman with a high bun, dark red lips, and eyes that no longer sparkled. She was gone long ago. I used to dream. Used to design homes filled with freedom. Now, I lived in a picture-perfect one, where everything looked right, except the marriage. I opened my purse. A message blinked on the screen. Cars ready, rear exit, lot 3, J. Jason, my best friend for 20 years, the only one who knew I'd been planning this moment for 6 months. He always said, "Grace, you don't need a scene to reclaim your freedom. You just need the right moment to leave." I took a deep breath, adjusted my pearl earrings and stepped out. The orchestra had shifted to a slower tune. Richard and Claire were still on the floor. The world around them vanished. Perfect. I moved through the crowd, standing where Richard couldn't possibly miss me. And then he saw me. His gaze wavered for a second. Claire turned too, and for a moment I saw more than victory in her eyes. I saw doubt. "Grace," Richard stammered, trying to create distance between them. "Claire and I were just discussing legal strategy, right?" I cut in, my voice soft. "Very passionate. Carry on." I calmly placed my champagne glass on a nearby table. Then, from my purse, I pulled out something small. The platinum wedding band he gave me on our 5-year anniversary. No farewell words, no tears. I laid the ring on the glass tabletop. The sound was strangely soft, yet sharp, like the first crack in a perfect mask. "Keep dancing with her, Richard," I whispered, "because you won't notice when I disappear." I turned, walking away with the music in my wake. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because I knew, by the time Richard realized what he'd lost, I'd be somewhere he could never reach. A gray Lincoln waited at lot 3, engine idling. Jason sat behind the wheel, lit by the glow of his phone as I opened the door. His eyes met mine, no questions asked. He just nodded, like confirming that the plan was in motion and that from this moment on, I was no longer Grace Donovan, wife of prominent attorney Richard Donovan. "You bring the old phone?" Jason asked as I got in. I handed him the iPhone Richard used to track my schedule, calls, even photos. "Powered off, location still on." Jason smiled. "Perfect." He tossed it into a black bag with a few other devices I'd been prepping for weeks. When that bag went into the Hudson River tomorrow morning, any trace of me would vanish with it. I stared out the window. The city still sparkled, still pulsed, still cold, as if no one cared a woman had just left behind 12 years of marriage. But I didn't need the city's sympathy. I needed a beginning no one could trace. "You sure about this?" Jason asked, turning onto the highway away from Manhattan. "More than ever," I said, gripping my bag. Inside, a new ID, an unactivated phone, and a folder Jason helped me prepare for months. My new name was Nora Whitman, born 1985 in Madison, Wisconsin, degree in strategic management, background in operations consulting for mid-sized firms, real enough to pass checks, vague enough to avoid scrutiny. When I first brought up the idea of disappearing, Jason had stayed silent a long time. We once dated sophomore year, but time, distance, and choices split us. I married Richard. Jason went into cybersecurity, stayed single, always said love was a luxury in a world full of data breaches. But when I said I wanted to vanish, he said just one thing. If you're going to do it right. And he didn't just help me, he taught me how to vanish. We opened a Belize bank account under my new name, moved money in small transfers from a personal account Richard never checked. I sold part of my design studio's stake through a legal entity Jason set up, funneled the money into a Singapore business account. We hired an independent financial expert to diversify the assets, everything under Nora Whitman. We also hired a discreet attorney, an old contact of Jason's from witness protection, to legalize all ID changes, asset transfers, even the new passport. Medical card, social security, Portland residency papers, they're all in your suitcase, Jason said as we turned into a remote guest lodge. You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow my sister's contact will get you to the airport. I'm not flying straight to Portland? No, you'll stop in Denver, change names again. Nora Whitman is just a bridge. I nodded, all part of the plan. When we parked, Jason handed me a new phone. No GPS, no social apps. Only use this to call me if it's urgent. From now on, you're Nora. No turning back. I looked at him for a long time. Those eyes, unchanged after all these years, held something Richard never did. Absolute trust. Thank you, Jason, for everything. He nodded, silent. I knew helping me wasn't just about protecting someone he once loved. It was his way of redeeming what we lost years ago. I entered the room, opened my suitcase and sat by the simple bed. On the wooden table I placed the Nora Whitman ID beside the only photo I brought. My mother, who used to say, "You can be anyone, as long as you choose the right time to begin." I had chosen the right time, and tonight was the beginning. The next morning I sat in the quiet room as sunlight filtered through the curtains, dust floating like a faint stage curtain in the air. I opened the encrypted laptop Jason had prepped, used only for accessing finances, secured data, and evidence. What I was about to open was a file that had cost me many sleepless nights, a collection of documents gathered during the final 2 months before I disappeared, while Richard still believed I was busy designing a boutique hotel in Asheville. It all started when I came across a letter from the bank buried in a pile of unopened mail on the desk at home. Normally Richard handled all the financial paperwork. I never had a reason to question anything. But this letter, titled Notice of Secondary Mortgage Loan, was addressed to me as a co-owner of the house. I remembered clearly, the $1,800,000 0 cents home in Fulton County had been fully paid off by the 3rd year of our marriage, mostly using the inheritance I received from my grandfather after he passed away. And yet, Richard had taken out a $650,000 0 cents loan against that very house 6 months ago, without saying a word. I felt like the floor had just vanished beneath me. I called Jason, nearly in a state of panic. He came over within an hour, bringing data recovery tools and remote email retrieval software. "I think I can help you find something on Richard's laptop," Jason said as he plugged a USB drive into the silver MacBook Richard always took on business trips. "But Grace, if you decide to dig deep, you need to be ready. Not everything you find is going to be something you want to know." I nodded. The truth, even if painful, is better than staying naive. Within 20 minutes, we found files hidden in a folder with simple but sophisticated encryption. Inside were detailed spreadsheets of investments Richard had secretly made, under a shell company, Donovan Strategic Holdings. Not a single entry involved joint assets. No reports had ever been shared with me. And worse, the money from the mortgage loan had been split and transferred into 3 private investment accounts in Miami, one of which listed a co-owner, Claire Monroe. "Claire!" I whispered. That name cut deep. It was no longer suspicion, no longer theory. It was solid proof that Richard hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He had, financially, conspired with another woman behind my back. Jason didn't say anything, just watched me. I knew he was waiting for a reaction. But I didn't cry. I just felt cold, not from the weather, but from being erased from my own life. I started collecting everything: bank statements, emails, a copy of the mortgage agreement, footage from the security camera at the penthouse Richard rented in Savannah, a place I had never been invited to but Claire had visited at least 10 times in the past 3 months. There was even a receipt for a sapphire jewelry set worth nearly $20,000, 0 cents from a boutique jeweler. An exact match to what Claire wore at the firm's end-of-quarter party. The most painful? A hotel reservation receipt from the Four Seasons in Chicago, the same night I stayed home hosting a birthday dinner for his mother. I quietly saved every file, locked them with passwords, and uploaded them to a secure cloud system Jason had set up. If you don't log in within 72 hours, Jason said, all this data will automatically be sent to Richard's law partners, the Georgia State Bar, and a financial investigative journalist I know. I nodded again. No words were needed. In that moment I understood. Richard hadn't just planned for a life without me. He'd been building it quietly for over a year, using my money, my effort, and my trust. If I hadn't uncovered it, one day he would have walked away from the marriage as the victor, and I'd be left with the shattered remains of a life wiped clean. But now everything had changed. I didn't need to confront Richard. I just needed to disappear the right way, and let him destroy himself with his own arrogance and bottomless ambition. And when he realized I was no longer there to endure or forgive, he'd learn. Some losses can't be bought back with any contract. 2 days after leaving the suburban safe house, I sat inside a climate-controlled box truck disguised as a medical equipment transport unit. The woman driving, Marcia, was in her 50s, with short hair and a voice like old cigarettes. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. Jason had told me ahead of time, she's the one who'll take you somewhere no one will ever find. That place was a cedarwood cabin deep in the Appalachian woods, on private land in North Carolina. No house number, no cell signal, no Wi-Fi, just rustling leaves, cold air, and the scent of burning wood from the fireplace. "Welcome to your starting point," another female voice said as I stepped inside. Her name was Avery Dean, a behavior and body language specialist who once worked in the Federal Witness Protection Program. Jason had brought her in to help me shed my skin, not just by changing my appearance, but by teaching me to live as a completely different person. Grace Donovan is an interior designer with refined taste, a standard Midwest accent, polished style, reserved but polite, Avery said, eyes fixed on me. But Nora Whitman, she's someone else. More grounded, strong but not approval-seeking. She leads with logic, not excess emotion. Understand? I nodded, but Avery immediately shook her head. No. Don't nod like that. That's Grace's reflex. Nora keeps her eyes forward, her words brief, and speaks only when needed. In the first 3 days I learned how to walk, speak, and even smile differently. Avery had me stand in front of the mirror for hours, adjusting every micro-expression, from a raised brow to how I turned my body during conversation. I dyed my hair chestnut brown with caramel highlights, a shade Richard once called cheap. I switched to light brown contact lenses, making my eyes colder and more distant. My wedding ring-wearing hands were now painted nude, clean, with no trace left behind. "Next is behavior," Avery said as we ate lunch in the simple, cozy kitchen. "You need to unlearn Grace's reactions. When someone asks, 'Where are you from?' don't hesitate like you're hiding something." Nora grew up in Milwaukee, studied at Greenfield College, worked in Charlotte and Seattle. The answer should be clear and confident. I spent every evening practicing in front of the mirror, introducing myself, repeating the fabricated memories that Jason and I had created to build Nora's background. Each story had a real location, real people who had lived there. Jason had verified it all through old civil records to ensure credibility. On day 4, a new person arrived. Dr. Renee Salazar, a behavioral psychologist. She would help with the internal transformation. "Keeping up appearances is one thing," Renee said during our first session, her voice as soft as a breeze. "But if your feelings and responses don't change, every disguise can eventually be stripped away." She asked me dozens of questions. When was the last time I felt truly happy? Why did I keep my mother's photo in my suitcase? Why did I choose the name Nora? I answered truthfully, that my mother always taught me to know when to walk away. That I chose Nora after her biological mother, who left her husband and raised a child alone in a time when no one encouraged it. And that I kept the photo not out of weakness, but to remember where I came from. Renee smiled. Good, keep that. Memory is the foundation of a new identity. By day 6 I had begun to develop Nora's reflexes. I walked with confidence, no longer seeking eye contact for validation. I spoke concisely, no longer asking for permission to speak. I stopped reaching for my left wrist, where a wedding band used to leave a mark. I no longer softened my voice when expressing an opinion. That night Avery handed me a file, a driver's license, an employee badge from a strategic consulting firm in Portland, and the financial records of a bank account under the name Nora Whitman. "You're ready?" Avery said. "From now on, Grace Donovan is officially gone. You are Nora, and you live as her, if you truly want to survive." I held the file and something swelled in my chest, not fear, but relief. 1 month after officially becoming Nora Whitman, I was living in a small apartment on the outskirts of Portland. It wasn't luxurious or glamorous, but it was quiet enough for me to hear my own voice, the one that had been silenced for years beneath the noise of a performative marriage. Each morning I brewed my coffee, opened my encrypted laptop, and logged into the secure account Jason had set up for me. Not to check a bank balance, but to track the progress of another plan. The unraveling of Richard Donovan. I never planned on revenge. But when I found out he'd mortgaged my house, embezzled marital assets, and plotted to erase me from all financial rights, I was left with no choice but to let him destroy himself, with a little help from me. Jason was the one who triggered the emergency data package just a week after I left Georgia. The file contained all the evidence I'd collected: emails detailing financial deals between Richard and Claire, suspicious fund transfers, and most importantly, a copy of the mortgage agreement forged with my signature. There was also an audio recording of a conversation between Richard and a private banker in Palm Beach, where he bragged about restructuring the company to separate equity from spousal interference. Jason had extracted that from a VoIP call Richard didn't know was being recorded. Just a few days later, Jason got word from a friend on the Georgia Ethics Committee. Richard's former partner received the file. Investigators are moving in. That short message told me everything I needed to know. The storm had begun. 3 weeks later, a headline on a local news site flashed across my screen. Attorney Richard Donovan under investigation for financial fraud related to Donovan Strategic Holdings. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt justice. Day by day, the media got involved. Former clients began speaking out, raising questions about shady investments Richard had handled. The state bar issued a statement saying it was reviewing temporary suspensions for attorneys linked to internal complaints. Claire Monroe, the same woman who once spun beneath ballroom lights with Richard, was now appearing silently beside him in a few candid shots, no radiant smile in sight. Rumor had it she'd been terminated after Richard's firm officially severed all ties with him. Jason sent me a message with a short video clip from the preliminary hearing. In it, Richard stood in a dark suit, looking more gaunt than usual. He denied all wrongdoing, blaming internal oversights and lack of supervision from the finance team. But I knew better. Richard never did anything he couldn't control. A month later, the court officially convicted Richard Donovan on 3 counts: misappropriation of client funds, misuse of investment capital, and forgery of legal documents. The sentence: 5 years in federal prison, eligible for parole in 3 if he cooperated with the investigation. Not a single mention of Grace Donovan in the media. I had been completely erased from his life, exactly as he once wished. But this time I was the one who walked away, and the one who remained intact. I looked at the screen. In a photo accompanying the article, Richard was stepping out of the courthouse, surrounded by reporters. His head was down, avoiding the cameras. He was no longer the sharp-eyed man who once commanded every boardroom. He was no longer the man I once loved. I shut the laptop and stepped onto the balcony. The Portland sky on that soft autumn afternoon felt calm and forgiving. The glass in my hand no longer trembled. My breath no longer came in stutters. Because real freedom doesn't come from running away. It comes when you face the past without letting it control you. A year later, I stood by the window of my 22nd floor apartment in Brooklyn Heights, holding a steaming cup of coffee. From there I could see the Manhattan skyline in the distance, where glass towers caught the morning sun, as if the city itself was welcoming me. Quietly, but with conviction. I am Nora Whitman, 38 years old, an organizational restructuring consultant, working with companies undergoing mergers or leadership changes. The name Grace Donovan is now just an old layer of memory, tucked away in a place no one can reach. I left Portland after 6 quiet months of building a professional resume, industry connections, and a polished portfolio. Painstakingly crafted by Jason and Avery. In New York, I didn't bring memories. I brought a foundation. I wasn't here to hide, I was here to claim. My office is in an old brick building on Spring Street, where every red stone has seen victories and failures alike. I don't have a personal assistant. Every contract is an exam, every project a test. Dunbridge and Line Financial is currently my biggest client. Just coming out of chaos after their former CEO was investigated for market manipulation. I was hired to restructure the culture and personnel framework. In other words, they needed someone to salvage their reputation before it vanished completely. At this morning's board meeting, I presented a mid-tier leadership overhaul plan. Not a single name in the room shook me. No piercing stare made me falter. I was no longer the woman who stood behind her husband, smiling politely when referred to as Richard Donovan's wife. I was Nora. And I spoke to be heard, not to be accepted. The meeting ended with firm nods. The chairwoman, Clarissa Hill, shook my hand, her steely gray eyes looking at me like she saw her younger self. "You make me feel young again," she said. "We need women like you, not because you're a woman, but because you have steel." I walked out of the building and into the city's tireless rhythm. A year ago I thought freedom meant leaving without being noticed. But now I knew. True freedom is living fully in the open and still being entirely yourself. That evening I attended an art exhibition by a new friend, Isabel Tran, a Vietnamese-American visual artist with a striking lens. Her black and white photographs captured the city's old corners, where transformation happened quietly but fiercely. I saw myself in every frame, a quiet survivor of harsh transitions. I was admiring a photo titled First Steps when a familiar voice came from behind. "I didn't expect to see you here, Nora." I turned and met the eyes of Elliot Marks, interim head of HR at Dunbridge and Lyon. We'd worked together months ago on a downsizing initiative, and I assumed he was there to revisit the ripple effects of a choice we once made together. "You into art too?" I asked, keeping my tone easy. "Lately, yeah," he smiled. "Ever since I learned black and white can reveal the most colorful truths." We talked a while about photography, about work, and then about the rare stillness in a city that never sleeps. He didn't ask anything more, no probing into the past. Maybe because he saw in me something I'd spent a year reclaiming, a presence that didn't require validation from anyone else. Back at the apartment, I received an email from Jason. "Fulton House has been foreclosed, case closed." I stared at that line for a long time, then quietly deleted it. Not because I didn't care, but because I no longer needed to hold on to the things that once held me back. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and finalized a new strategic proposal for a law firm looking to rebrand after a scandal. Ironically, in the very field Richard once dominated, I was now helping redefine the standard. And I didn't need to boast about it. My life now has no scars from the past, no aftershocks from a broken marriage, no shadow belonging to anyone but myself. That Friday afternoon, like clockwork, I received a message from the encrypted security system Jason built over a year ago. "Safety check confirmed, code Nightingale." A brief, clean message, but it carried the weight of a year of escape, transformation, and rebirth. I sat in the warm kitchen of my Brooklyn apartment, chamomile tea in hand, the sunset casting gold across the Manhattan Bridge through the large window. That message no longer carried the urgency it once did. Now, it was a quiet reminder. I'm still here, alive, free, and no longer anyone's possession. I opened my laptop and browsed the financial news sites I still checked every weekend, a habit that hadn't faded. One headline in the business ethics and law section made me pause. Victoria Blake steps down from Altura Capital amid financial scandal tied to Richard Donovan. I read slowly. Victoria had returned to San Diego 3 months ago after being ousted from the executive board. No more images of her at Richard's side at black tie events. No more ambitious speeches about global innovation funds. To the media, she was now just another woman who trusted the wrong man, and paid for it with her entire reputation. And Richard? He was serving time in a federal prison in Ohio, spending the next 5 years rethinking moves he once believed were clever. I read an analysis piece suggesting that if he hadn't tried to move assets so quickly, if he hadn't forged my signature on that loan contract, maybe things wouldn't have crumbled so fast. But that if was never for people who believed they were smarter than everyone else, and he, the man who once ruled an entire law firm, never saw the one thing he couldn't control coming. Me. Catherine Elliott, the woman who once smiled gently beside him in press photos, who once stepped back so he could take the stage, had completely vanished from his world. No farewell, no trace, and certainly no control left for him to hold on to. I stood up and pulled a small walnut box from the drawer. Inside, along with a few leftover personal keepsakes, was a handwritten card from my mother. The ink had faded over time, but the words still held. You can start over, as long as you don't lose yourself. Back when I was Grace, I believed I had to sacrifice pieces of myself to preserve the marriage. I thought silence was a mark of maturity. Now I understand that silence only pulled me further away from who I was. And rebirth doesn't come from running. It comes from choosing to live honestly with myself, with my memories, and with the future. That evening, Isabel and I attended the opening of a new art space on the Lower East Side. As I stepped in, I caught my reflection in a large pane of glass. Nora Whitman. Chestnut hair, bright eyes, steady gaze, squared shoulders, a smile that owed no one anything. A woman that Richard, even if he passed right by, would never recognize. We raised our glasses to celebrate the new space. Isabel tilted her head and asked softly, "Do you ever think about seeing him again, just to say something?" I smiled and shook my head. I don't need to see him. I once left in silence, but that silence was the loudest thing I've ever said. And now, I'm living the part of life he never thought I was capable of. Isabel nodded, her eyes softening, and clinked her glass against mine. Nothing more needed to be said. On the way home, I stopped by the park near my apartment, the one where I usually wrote in my journal every Sunday morning. A breeze brushed over my shoulder, and the last leaves of fall began to scatter over the bench. I opened my old leather notebook and wrote a few lines. Rebirth isn't starting over, it's continuing, stronger. After everything seemed to end, Catherine Elliott is gone, but from her ashes a woman named Nora Whitman rose. And this time, she won't step back for anyone. I closed the journal, stood up and walked away, as if I had never been anyone else. Grace's story is proof of a woman's inner strength when she chooses to let go in order to be reborn. She didn't seek revenge through loud words or dramatic acts, but through living a new life, brighter and more self-possessed than ever before. In a world where many still choose to endure in silence to protect the image of family, Grace chose to walk away and rebuild herself from the ruins. She didn't just escape the shadows of her past, she became a symbol of freedom, resilience, and the right to own her life. What do you think about Grace's choice? Could she have done things differently, or was this the only way to truly find herself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful and emotional family stories.